Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is Hanni Syafiqah binti Kamaruzaman. My metric number is 056492. Today, my teammate and I are going to explore about Rohingya refugees and right protection gap in Malaysia. Generally speaking, a refugee is a displaced person who has crossed national boundaries and who cannot or is unwilling to return home due to well-founded fear of persecution. The term refugee derives from the root word refuge. It is from Old French. The meaning is hiding place. It refers to shelter or protection from any such of danger or distress. Such an individual may be labeled as asylum seeker until the contracting state or the UN High Commissioner for Refugees has given them a refugee status if they officially file an asylum application. The lead international agency that currently coordinating refugee protection is the United Nations Office of the UNHCR. Not only that, refugees are also defined and protected in international law. Human rights, on the other hand, are norms that aspire to protect all people everywhere from severe political, legal, and social abuses. Seeking asylum is also one of the fundamental human rights. Everyone has the right to live at liberty. Everyone has the right to freedom from fear. Everyone has the right to seek asylum from persecution, and these human rights don't change based on race, religion, sex, nationality. Human rights don't change based on whether you seek safety by land, air, or even sea. Now, what about Malaysia, you ask? Malaysia currently hosting more than 150,000 UNHCR registered Rohingya refugees. 75% of them live in Kuala Lumpur and its surrounding states of Selangor, Pulau Pinang, and Johor. To have further information on history of the refugees, Fatini Amira will explain it further.
My name is Nurfatini Amirah Binti Nasir, matrix number 056376. For many centuries, refugee movements were a result of religious and racial intolerance. Entire groups were uprooted, exiled, or deported by secular or religious authorities in an effort to enforce conformity. Examples of such action include the expulsion of Jews from Spain in the late 15th century, the exodus of Hugendas from France in 1685, and the eviction of Jews from Germany, Australia, and Sudetenland in the 1930s. Politically motivated refugee movements, frequent in modern times, have occurred intermittently since the development of governments powerful enough to oppress non-conformist minorities. For example, between 1945 and 1961, the year that the communist regime erected the Berlin Wall, more than 3.7 million refugees from East Germany found asylum in West Germany. International action for refugees did not start until the 1920s. In 1921, Fridtjof Nansen of Norway was appointed by the League of Nations as High Commissioner for Refugees and devised a so-called League of Nations passport, a travel document that gave the owner the right to move more freely across national boundaries. After Nansen's death in 1930, the protection of refugees was entrusted to the Nansen International Office for Refugees, but this office accomplished little before its mandate expired in 1938. Since the 1960s, large concentration of refugees have been located in Africa and Asia. Although the numbers varied from year to year, each of the two regions accounted for more than 3 million refugees in 2005. In the same year, the total number of refugees worldwide was estimated to be roughly 9 million. That's all from me. Thank you.
The Rohingya have been seeking refuge in Malaysia since the 1980s. The right granted by the Malaysian government for the Rohingya refugee in line with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is firstly the right to education. Malaysia has established education for Rohingya refugees. Many adult Rohingya refugees are illiterate, with some able to read and write Jawi, and after years of living in Malaysia, they can speak the Malay language. The Rohingya refugee children attend learning centres operated by the community and faith-based organisations with the assistance of UNHCR. The right to education can be seen in Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, stated that everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free. at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory, technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all based on merit. Hence, the right to education for Rohingya refugees granted by the Malaysian government in line with UDHR. Next, Malaysia also guarantees the right of everyone to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. Although Malaysia is not party to the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and its 1967 Protocol, some of its provisions are principles of customary international law, notably the principles of non-refoulement, which provides that contracting state shall expel or return refouler a refugee in any manner whatsoever to the frontiers of territories where his life or freedom would be threatened. Article 14 Clause 1 of the UDHR enshrines the right of everyone to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. The human rights and fundamental freedoms referred to in Article 55 Clause C of the UN Charter are specified in the UDHR and include in this right.
Section 4, Clause 4 of the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia Act allows regard to UDHR to the extent that the declaration does not conflict with federal constitution. The main significance for the plight of refugees lies in Article 14 of the UDHR, which cherish the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. The Human Rights Commission of Malaysia Haque has adopted an expansive interpretation of this declaration. Many tragic cases of refugees and stateless persons who have been living illegally in Malaysia for over 20 years without any status, particularly the stateless Rohingya from Myanmar. They have raised children who were born in Malaysia. For all practical purposes, these children are Malaysian and yet they are not recognized as such by the authorities. Thus far, the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia has been more successful with assisting undocumented children than other categories of refugees and undocumented persons. In 2002, the Commission was able to intervene to help the deportation of 2 Rohingya boys, aged 8 and 10, who were arrested by the police. The Commission was able to move the Malaysian welfare authorities to obtain a court order to halt their deportation, remove the boy from the immigration detention depot, and subsequently have the boys placed in the care of a welfare home until their next kin could be located. Their parents were eventually located by the welfare authorities and the boys were eventually released into the care of their parents. In such instances, the Human Rights Commission of Malaysia reminds the relevant government authority of Malaysia obligation under the Convention of the Right of the Child, CRC. Malaysia is required under Article 2 Clause 1 to ensure the right of all children within its jurisdiction without discrimination of any kind. Furthermore, under Article 22, Malaysia is required to provide child asylum seekers with all the additional protection guaranteed to them under international refugee law, at least until proper procedures have been instituted to verify and determine their status.
There are no legislative or administrative provision in place for dealing the situation of the asylum seekers or refugees in Malaysia. The UNHCR conducts all activities related to the protection of refugees, namely the receptions, registration, documentation, and refugee status determinations of asylum seekers and refugees. The UNHCR in Malaysia cooperates with various partners including government, NGOs and volunteers to provide assistance for refugees in variety areas such as healthcare, education, financial supports for vulnerable individuals, shelter, counselling and other welfare needs. Not only that, they also provide legal representation for the refugees in the court for offences under the Immigration Act. They also carry out advocacy, capacity building, training with the refugees, government, media and civil society partners.
Zamri, metric number 055349. Now, I would like to explain about the protection gaps of refugees' right in Malaysia. Before that, we shall look into the meaning of the protection gap itself. Protection gap refers to the inadequacies in the protection afforded to refugees. Since we only focus on the Malaysia scope, this protection gaps is easier interpreted as the Malaysian law, which regulating the refugees' right are either not applicable, non-existent, or inadequate in scope, or are not interpreted and or applied in an appropriate manner. Despite of the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees endeavours in protecting refugees' right in Malaysia, Malaysia, which by granting them the Registration and Refugee Status Determination (RSD), which allow them to have access to basic needs and essential services like education, primary healthcare and work, Malaysian authorities still make use of Malaysian Immigration Act and Passport Act to detain and arrest the refugees due to neither of these acts have made any references to the refugees. Moreover, the immigration officer also have wide powers of search and arrest which may be used to harass the refugees under the Act. These acts also provide the imprisonment of those in breach of local immigration law in detention centres, since the Passport Act permit arrest without a warrant of any person if an immigration, police and custom officer reasonably believe the individual has committed or attempting to commit an offence under this Act. The reasonable belief is subjective, and so in practice, arrests continue unabated. Furthermore, Malaysia's Defence Minister Ismail Sabri also announced publicly that Rohingyas have no status in the country, which then, aided by Home Minister Hamzah Zainuddin, that the government does not recognise the documentation provided by the UNHCR to these refugees despite prior agreement that UNHCR card holders would be afforded relative protection. One of the incidents pertaining to this protection gap of refugees' rights in Malaysia has occurred in June 2020, where 27 Rohingyas men have been punished with whipping and 7 months in jail for entering Malaysia without valid documentation under Section 6 of the Immigration Act by the Langkawi Magistrate Court. Fortunately, following an outcry, the Al-Star High Court overturned this decision. However, there are no safeguards to ensure other Rohingya refugees will not face the same threat in the future, since Malaysia is not a signatory of the 1951 Refugee Convention as well as the 1967 Protocol relating to the status of refugees.
There are three possible solutions for the protection gap of Rohingya refugees in Malaysia, which are voluntary repatriation, win-win outcome, and resettlement. The primary purpose is to safeguard the rights and well-being of refugees, and the ultimate goal is to help find durable solutions that will allow them to rebuild their lives in dignity and peace. The first possible solution is voluntary repatriation. This solution for those who have made the decision to return home and together with the country of origin and international community in order to protect their safety. We can see no large-scale voluntary repatriation is taking place in Malaysia, and since 2016, new arrivals of Rohingyas both effectively slower due to effective law enforcement and disruption in the region. Secondly is win-win outcome solution, where interests of each group can be addressed through the regulation of all persons of concern to UNHCR, including work rights. The government can register scheme for all POCs to allow them temporary work permits to access basic services such as healthcare and education. This also could organize crime and nascent threats to national security. Third solution is resettlement. This solution transfer of refugees from an asylum country to another state that has agreed to admit them and ultimately grant them permanent settlement. It is also durable solutions that involve the relocation of refugees from an asylum country to a third country. In Malaysia, resettlement is the most durable solution for refugees. Since 2005, 180,000 refugees from 50 countries were submitted for resettlement consideration. Since then, 88,000 refugees have departed from Malaysia to a resettlement country.